Or be
Not
willing
in
to
this
take the
room.
consequences.
Yeah,
The hot mic, huh?
exactly.
Not afraid.
Okay.
All right. So good evening, dear friends. Thank you for sharing your evening with us as we continue our discussion on reparations and racial inequity. A warm welcome to Dr. Brown, our guest speaker tonight. After Dr. Brown's presentation, there will be time to ask him questions. Before turning over the screen to him, however, we want a special thank you to Jack Schmidt and his subcommittee for their great work on following and advising us on key legislation to
Yes.
impact systemic racism, and for Bethany Gregg and her great work on environmental justice legislation. So we'll take time a little bit later in the evening for an update on those. But now, if you will please mute yourselves as Father leads us in prayer.
And on this special night, let us all pray. Holy One, you created this mystery of unity and diversity that displays itself throughout the universe. Sadly, for reasons we continue to seek answers to, we human beings have broken that unity and look with immense sadness at so much that is broken and scattered around our feet. Yet, our religious and spiritual history tells us that you are not only the creator, but are also the restorer, and call us to this deeply spiritual task. Tonight, these broken bonds of fidelity between our races cry out for repair and restoration. And they cry to any and all ears willing to hear, and to any and all hands that will be willing to do the hard and sometimes delicate work of repair. So help us tonight in our seeking to understand these things, the very nature of our breaking, the harm, sadness, and even just anger at recognizing what is broken among us. Discernment of what the repairs must be and how they can be accomplished. Joy at the prospect that what you created with such beauty can reveal its beauty once again. And lastly, deepening clarity about what each of us and all of us must do with your grace. May we be guided tonight by the great restorer and reconciler, Jesus, who lives forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Father. So last month, we continued our examination of history and all the failed attempts for racial equity because of white supremacists, white ignorance and fear, racist policies and laws, white power, and the list went on. We discussed the enormity of changing minds and hearts that remain today, and the complexity of dismantling racism in a society that has encapsulated it in every artery. To shed light on what is ahead, we are grateful to have Dr. Lawrence T. Brown join us tonight. Dr. Brown is the founder and director of the Black Butterfly Academy, a virtual racial equity education and consulting firm. From 2013 to 2019, he served as an assistant and associate professor at Morgan State University in the School of Community Health and Policy, where he launched the hashtag Be More Lead Free initiative. In 2020, he directed the US COVID-19 Atlas work and response for the County Health Rankings and Roadmaps program in partnership with the University of Chicago Center for Spatial Data Science. His first book, The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America, was published by Johns Hopkins University Press in January 2021. And he is also the proud grandson of sharecroppers and preachers, and it is my pleasure to turn the group over to him. So welcome, Dr. Brown. And if everyone could just mute themselves, that would be great.
They can't hear you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? All right. I know I'm in a group that's affiliated with church because I see a Mark, I see Philip, I see Mary, all these biblical names. It's beautiful to be with you all this evening. So I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about the legacy of Baltimore apartheid, and we're going to learn a lot about the different ways that different institutions have played a role throughout city's history in creating the urban apartheid that we see today and the impacts of that. I do want to start my remarks with an expression of condolence for the folks that were massacred down in Atlanta, the 6 of them Asian women. Also a reflection of the white supremacy that we have to wrestle with as well. And I may tie that in a little bit with this presentation. So we're definitely in mourning with folks who are suffering. We're still, of course, wrestling with a pandemic that's taking so many lives, and there's a lot of work that we have to do as a country, and of course as a city and region to really move America forward so that it can be the country that it should be. So thank you to you all. Thanks to everyone who has picked up a copy of my book. You can definitely find out much more than the details I'm going to share with you tonight. But let's dive into the presentation that I want to share. So here we are. We're talking about the enduring legacy of Baltimore apartheid. And these are the 3 gentlemen right here that we're going to have to really pay attention to. 3 pivotal mayors in Baltimore City's history that I call sarcastically the godfathers of Baltimore apartheid. And that's Mayor John Barry Mahul, Mayor James Preston, and 4-time mayor, 2 separate periods where he served as mayor, but over 4 terms, Mayor Howard Jackson. So in 1910, Mayor John Barry Mahul on the left, he was mayor. It was at the end of his term. As you can see, he left office in 1911. So towards the end of his tenure, he passed the first residential racial zoning law in American history. And then shortly thereafter, Mayor James Preston became mayor, and he picked up the baton and he kept running with it, enforcing racial segregation and making it come alive in Baltimore City. Mayor Howard Jackson would play a role as well. So we see this sort of brief timeline of specific racial policies that actually played a very powerful role in creating the landscape, the geography of the city as we know it today. And we'll touch on those momentarily. So we'll start right here with this article in the New York Times Magazine published on Christmas Day in 1910. And they report right here on Monday, December 19th, this man right here, the man in the middle, Mayor John Barry Mahul, passed the first residential racial zoning law in American history. As an aside, I'm saying residential because there was actually a business racial zoning law passed in San Francisco in 1888. And it was targeting Chinese laundromats and restricting where they could be located in San Francisco. So there we actually see the anti-Asian bias baked into policy beginning in 1888. But the first time it was done residentially was done in Baltimore City. And what had happened was this black man right here, George McMecken, if you're from Baltimore, if you live in Baltimore or been through Baltimore, you may have heard of McMecken Street, named after him, and a school, I believe, as well, I've seen. He was a black lawyer. He was the first graduate of the newly renamed Morgan College, which actually started out as the Centenary Biblical Institute. So the Centenary Biblical Institute became Morgan College, George McMecken was the first graduate of Morgan College, and he graduated in 1895. So he graduates from Morgan College in 1895. He goes to Yale Law School. He whoops Yale Law School, gets his a degree in law, his law degree in 1897, and then he moves back to Baltimore. He settles in. He becomes a practicing attorney, and he moves into 1834 McCullough Street, which was an all-white block in the summer of 1910. And he did what African Americans do. Yes, we can. We moving on up. We finally got a piece of the pie. And he moved into this all-white block, and the white community said, "Oh, no, you Negroes can't." And they had a fit. They had a fit when him and his wife, Anna, their two children, and other African Americans were beginning to move into this block. They had a fit. They picked up rocks. Oh my goodness. They picked up rocks and threw it through the windows of his house. They picked up bricks and threw it through the skylight of his home, 3 stories, 1834 McCullough Street. And so eventually the white community in Baltimore, and we have to remember, white Baltimore, hold up, let me come off of, I got to talk to you directly. Sometimes I got to come off the PowerPoint. So he moved into this block, and we have to remember, Baltimore was a majority white city all the way until the mid-1970s. And that's hard to imagine now because Baltimore is very much a chocolate city today. But most of Baltimore City's history, it was a majority white city. And so part of the reason that I think the white community said maybe we should slow down with attacking and trying to intimidate the African American population is because Baltimore had one of the larger black communities outside of the Deep South at this time, percentage wise. So numerically, the population in Chicago and New York might have been bigger, but the percentage of African Americans in Baltimore was actually a little bit larger. So the white community said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't use violence because you never know. Black people might fight back. So what we are going to do is pass a law. And so they turned to law to structurally bar black people from moving into white blocks and white neighborhoods. And so this is what we're talking about. And you can pull this article up. And as a matter of fact, it is highly recommended reading. It's fascinating because you hear from all of these folks. You hear from, and these are all men, but they even quote a woman. They don't name her, but she talked. Oh, here's her quote over here. Well, at least the top or the part of it where she talks about that. I am sure that the colored race has no better friend than I. And back then, African Americans were either called colored or Negro. So you're going to see those terms. From my earliest recollection, my feeling for the race has been one based associated with affection. My old Negro mammy, my little nurse girl playmate, all are among my happiest recollections. But the idea of their assuming to live next door to me is abhorrent. I am sure no good can come of it to them. They will be lonesome up here away from the rest of their kind. It is a sad thing, and I do hope there will be found some way to put a stop to it, them moving into white communities. I would hate at my time of life, after living so many years in such pleasant relations with the darkies, as all my family have, to be compelled to change my idea upon the subject. And so they're quoting white Baltimoreans and all of their rationalizations and machinations. Oh, they don't want to be up here. They'll be lonesome among their own kind. They're leaving their fellow brethren and sister. And it's just really something to see how Baltimore came to be a hyper-segregated city, and it started legally 1910, and this article really covers it very powerfully. So definitely highly recommended to pull that up and check it out. Oh my goodness. I have to tell y'all now, the church got involved in racial segregation. Look at this, 4 churches signed segregation pact. Oh my Lord, the church, look, the hospital even was favoring the plan. And y'all, Dr. Brown, what churches are you talking about? I got the receipts. It's right here in the article. The churches are Franklin Street Methodist Episcopal, St. Pius Catholic, Memorial United Evangelical, and Concordia Evangelical Lutheran. So we have a cornucopia of churches and denominations, right, that were participating. They signed a pact. Y'all, we don't want the Negroes moving into our neighborhoods. And you see this language right here. Lafayette Square section now believed virtually safe from Negro invasion. And that language is really something. That language is really something. I want y'all to pay attention to it. But hold on, this is a church group, so I can come off. I can ask you all. I'm sure you all can let me know. Somebody come off of mute and tell me, what is a Negro invasion? I want you all to help me figure this out. What is a Negro? The Negroes are coming. So what is a Negro invasion? Somebody help me out here.
Extreme prejudice.
All right, extreme prejudice. Anybody else want to tell me what constitutes a Negro invasion?
Well, I grew up in St. Bernardines, Evanston Village,
Okay.
and Monsignor Louis Vaith got up from the pulpit and said they'll never cross that bridge. Which was the Hilton Street Bridge.
Okay.
Okay. And so
And you said he said it at the pulpit, right? In the pulpit?
said it in the pulpit.
In the pulpit. All right. Okay.
Oh, yeah. And so the invasion was when Goldsecker, who was a realtor,
Right.
went ahead and tried to scare the white people by saying, they're coming, they're coming. You better sell your house to me
Right.
while you got the good price.
Now tell me, how many black people did it take to constitute a Negro invasion?
One.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure we on the same page. So one black person could constitute a Negro invasion, right? And they will never cross this bridge. So we're seeing the churches are involved. You've heard it for yourself. You may have known some of these folks. And over here we got the hospital. They named the hospital members of the Board of Trustees of Brantley Baptist Church. Oh my goodness. They signified their intention to sign the agreement. And they was going to have a meeting the next week to discuss it. So we got all kinds, and then we got the Baltimore Sun over here, 1913. So now this is Mayor James Preston. There it is, race, law, and council. So the city council, they're talking about it. What can we do to end the Negro invasion? Now, what was happening at this time is that the Great Migration was getting underway. Many African Americans were leaving the Deep South because there was so much racial violence, so much terror. You had lynchings. The Equal Justice Initiative said between 1877, the end of Reconstruction, and 1950, more or less the beginning of the larger civil rights movement, over 4,000 African Americans were lynched. So you had Black people trying to get out of the Southern racial terror landscape that they were in and find their way to a better place. But when they arrived, look at how they were being described. Their arrival was being described as a Negro invasion. And so you see article after article after article that is using this language. Now, I told you there was a connection to what happened in Atlanta today. The power of racial rhetoric, when it's used, it sends a signal to violent white supremacists, and they will pick up on it oftentimes and use it as a means to do all kinds of violence. It can be structural violence, like we've seen here, legal violence, passing laws, but it can also be physical violence. So when our former president was using language like China flu or China virus and Kung flu, using that language, that sends a signal to folks who are ready to use physical violence, and then they act on it. And this is what happens. So language is not something that we should play with. Language is not something that we can dismiss when words are being used in a country where you have powerful people. If they tune into that language and they act on it, it can become very devastating for people who don't have as much power, people who are vulnerable, people who are marginalized, people who are demonized. And so we see this language right here as one, and we see how it's being pushed in the media, right? The newspaper, the primary newspaper in Baltimore, and they're using this language and they're repeating it. They're repeating it like build that wall, build that wall. During Reconstruction, instead of Negro invasion, there was a term called Negro domination. Just because Black people were entering Congress for the first time, the Confederates were locked out of leadership until the end of Reconstruction, and that was construed as Negro invasion. And that is what helped or kick off and spur a lot of racial violence in the South. So this language, stop the steal. Y'all remember that one? I'm old enough to remember Stop the Steal. Anybody remember that one? I know it was a long time ago, but Stop the Steal. What was being stolen? Who was doing the stealing? Basically, Black people, voters in Philadelphia, in Atlanta, in Milwaukee, in Detroit, in Flint, they were stealing the vote. They were stealing the vote. And we got to stop the steal. January the 6th, you had a mob meet up at the Capitol, right? They were tuning in to this racist language that was being projected in the media, just like what we're seeing here in the Baltimore Sun. So language structures policy. Racist language can structure and inform racial violence. And this is the legacy that we're seeing right here in our very own Baltimore Sun. And the church, oh my goodness, the church was right along with it. Right? They were in the midst. So this is another article. Again, this is Mayor James Preston now, right here, Mayor Preston. He had a plan, and he was mayor until 1919, to aid 90,000 Negroes. He had a plan to take several hundred Black families and move them to the suburbs. So he was proposing to uproot several hundred Black families and move them out to Baltimore County. Now, Baltimore County was actually a lot bigger because Baltimore had not annexed north of Cold Springs Lane. Until 1918, the northernmost boundary of Baltimore was Cold Spring Lane. So Mount Washington, Roland Park, not Guilford, because Guilford's a little bit further south, but Homeland, Govans, Laurelville, all of those were in the county. And so they were saying, wait a minute, you're going to send those Negroes out to us? We don't want them, because they were racist too. So they were afraid of the Negro colony. And that's the language that you're seeing right here. Suburban colony proposed. And then my field, I know I've been talking about the church, but my field, public health, is implicated. Dr. William T. Howard Jr., acting commissioner of health. He was in the Baltimore City Health Department. He presented statistics showing that the death rate among Negroes was nearly 100% greater than among white people due to conditions under which they live. I'm going to come back to that. But look over here on the right. They're giving statistics showing that Black people are more likely to die from tuberculosis, pneumonia, syphilis, influenza, poliomyelitis, whooping cough. So all of these things, and they're saying, wait a minute, these Negroes, they are more diseased. We got to do something to keep them away from us, to segregate them, to quarantine them. Public health, my field, becomes a rationale for racial segregation. The first rationale was that Black people would help decline or depreciate property values if they moved in. That was thrown out of court. So then public health, my field, becomes a justification for racial segregation. And so this is one thing to hopefully remind people that we have work to do within all of our domains. A lot of people point at the police. We got a lot of problems with the police, don't get me wrong. But we got problems in education, in housing, neighborhoods, in churches, right? Whatever domain, nonprofits, philanthropy, wherever you are. People sometimes ask me, Dr. Brown, where do I start to work? Where you are. You start with your neighborhood association, your church. Look at what you're doing in your circle of influence, particularly if you're talking about Baltimore and it's an older institution. Look at the history. And that's what the Maryland Diocese of the Episcopal Church, that's what I applaud them for doing. They looked at their history of slavery, and then I came to talk to them in 2019 about their history of racial segregation. And they deliberated and they voted, to pass a $1 million reparation seed fund. And I applaud them for doing the work and not just saying, oh, the police and all these entities out here, but looking within the mirror, in that mirror, to actually say, all right, here's what we've done, and we're going to take responsibility for it and do what we need to do to help heal the harm that was inflicted, which I believe is what a brother named Jesus told Zacchaeus to do when Zacchaeus was on that tree. But I don't want to get started because I start preaching. I don't want to take the Father's sermon from this Sunday. I don't want to take his sermon. I'm going to let him preach that one. So again, here we go with the Mount Royal Improvement Association. This is a 1929 or 30. And I found this letter in it's not called the Maryland Historical Society anymore. They changed their name. But here they had a meeting at the Associate Congregational Church, June 24th. Ooh, they had daylight savings times too. I just noticed that. And so here's what they did. The president was William Marbury. William Marbury, he was the president of the Mount Royal Improvement Associations. And so they had their officers, when they assumed office, assurances were given that plans will be presented for the maintenance of this district. And I should say Mount Royal Improvement Association, that's Mount Royal and Bolton Hill. So that's Reservoir Hill and Bolton Hill. That's the area that was covered by this district. And so the assurances were given when they took office that plans would be presented for the maintenance of this district as the most beautiful and desirable urban section of Baltimore, but that this could be done only after the property owners had made the district safe for white occupancy by the execution of a sufficient number of the association's protective agreements. So they use racially restrictive covenants to protect their homes, their neighborhood, Reservoir Hill and Bolton Hill. And even got the names of streets over here. You got Park Avenue, Bolton Street, Linden Avenue, Utah Place. So these are the blocks that were joining in, and the church was in the meeting was held at the church. So the pastor said, all right, now y'all segregationists, come on in. We welcome you as you help segregate Baltimore City. So the church was in the midst again. Now we're seeing neighborhood associations, Mount Royal Improvement Associations. We saw the mayor, the city council, public health. We're seeing system after system. We're seeing agency after agency, institution after institution, all colluding, all playing a role to make urban apartheid real in Baltimore City. It didn't just magically pop up. It had to be engineered. It had to be enforced. It had to be put in place. And that's what we're seeing in some of these primary source documents. And this is what I talk about in my book. Here's a letter from 5 other churches. These 5 churches, they wrote a resolution because they were trying to stop the Negro invasion coming through their neighborhood. And look at what they said here. Whereas the properties of said churches at said locations are of large financial value. These are some wealthy churches. And the said churches are now actively engaged in religious work. Oh, they preaching and teaching. They having a good old time. They are engaged in religious work in their respective communities, the fields being fertile. Oh, my Lord. They now preaching and teaching and trying to convert the Gentiles in the neighborhood, and Whereas the said invasion by the Negro race, if allowed to continue on said Madison Avenue, will unquestionably, within a short period, destroy both the financial value of said church properties and the religious usefulness of said churches in said communities. And then the churches named themselves Babcock Memorial Presbyterian Church, Bartholomew Protestant Episcopal Church, Church of the Incarnation Evangelical Lutheran, St. John Methodist Episcopal Church South, and Madison Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church, that they were writing them to warn them, inform them of the danger arising by reason of said Negro invasion. These church folk, they were concerned about the property values of their church more than they were concerned about the saving of souls, of the healing of the sick, of raising spiritually dead folk from the dead. They were sitting there pushing, lobbying the church, lobbying the city. They were lobbying the mayor and the real estate board. Y'all, we need to make segregation real in Baltimore because the Negroes are coming. And this is what the churches got together. Come on, Pastor, you ready? All right, Father, come on over here. Rabbi, you ready? They were working together to make Baltimore apartheid a reality. And that's the history. This is and with the church on board, the implication is that God is sanctifying this. God is he's authorizing this. If the pastor agrees that segregation is a good thing, then the Lord must be all right with blocking the Negro invasion. And this is the sordid history of Baltimore apartheid and the way that it came to be. Multiple institutions, agencies playing a role, making it come alive. And y'all, the Ku Klux Klan, even the Ku Klux Klan had a church.
Oh,
Y'all, Dr. Brown, he's crazy. He don't know what he talk. I got the proof. The Baltimore Sun, Sunday morning, August 24th, 1924, first Klan church in state dedicated in Harford County. You had the Grand Dragon, he was there, Kleagles, Titans, Cyclopses, and they were meeting in a field near Havre de Grace. You had the Reverend Mr. Sutcliffe at the first Klan church in Maryland. Look at how the Baltimore Sun is describing it. It was the most gorgeous religious spectacle Webster, which consists of a half dozen houses by the roadside, ever had seen. So they just laying it all out. The Klan had a church, y'all. The Ku Klux Klan. And I kind of wonder what that church service was like. I'm not saying I would have wanted to be there, but it would just be something. This is America's history. This is America. This is America, and part of that history right here in the newspaper, in the Baltimore Sun. And there's a quote here somewhere. I don't think if I can't find it too quickly, but the mayor of Havre de Grace, oh wait, what's this right here? The Reverend Sutcliffe without hat and garb like a priest or a Protestant. Okay, I thought it might say something else. But the mayor of Havre de Grace, he was told the Klan leader, look, anything y'all need me to do, I'll do it. He said that. And so the collusion, the church involvement, such a big part of the story. Then in the 1940s, during the war, World War II, Hitler marching over the seas, Nazis killing our Jewish brethren and sisters. And while Black soldiers were fighting for democracy and freedom abroad, they had to fight white supremacy at home because they needed to have housing, public housing, wartime housing, and it was supposed to be, the government was looking at placing it in far East Baltimore. But you had crowds of white Baltimoreans that booed the mayor when he suggested it, and they protested so much so that Black soldier housing was moved away They did not put housing for Black soldiers here. They ended up putting it down in Cherry Hill, down in Hollibird Avenue, down in, I believe that's Curtis Bay, and then out in Baltimore County in Turner Station. Now, let me ask you all a question. How many of you like living next to the water? Anybody like living next to the water, waterfront living? All right, we got John. John is raising his hand. All right. All right. So people like living near the water. But would you have wanted to live near the harbor, near that water in the time of the war? Why not? Why wouldn't you want to live near the water during the war? Because it was dirty. It was nasty. Pollution through the roof. Remember, this is World War II. So shipbuilding, industrial activity, Baltimore is at its prime. So all the industry down there is through the roof. They're polluting through the roof. The water is getting polluted left and right. The last place you wanted to live was near the water, near that water. You did not want, if you had money, means of any sort, you did not want to live near the water. And look at where public housing was placed. Right there next to all of that industrial activity, pollution, all of that going on. That's where public housing was placed. So we get a sense of that even more. Now, Mayor Howard Jackson, he's the mayor, or he's mayor in 1940, when public housing had begun 3 years earlier. Again, leading up to the war, the federal government begins to get involved in public housing. So look at how public housing was racially segregated. And it was racially segregated in two ways. So number one, up here is Mount Washington, Roland Park, Guilford, Homeland, Laurelville. Do y'all see any public housing developments? Hampton, do y'all see any public housing developments up there? We don't see any public housing developments up there. Public housing was placed intentionally. The darker the grade, the more African Americans, the more Negroes. Public housing was placed intentionally in Black communities. And like I said earlier, around this filthy water that you did not want to live next to at that time. So it was segregated in terms of where it was located, and then the actual public housing communities themselves were racially segregated. You had Negro housing communities and white public housing communities. So double racial segregation. The Housing Authority of Baltimore City, here's another agency. The Housing Authority of Baltimore City helps racially segregate Baltimore City in a very, very powerful way. So we see that from the map in 1940. This map is another devastating map, the most devastating map perhaps in city's history. How many of you have read or are familiar with Antero Patella's book, Not in My Neighborhood, How Bigotry Shaped the Great American City? So right, a few of you know about that. Maybe some of you read it. He has a great chapter in his book where he deals with the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which is a federal agency. It later becomes the Federal Housing Administration. It's the Federal Housing Administration, or the Homeowners Loan Corporation. They draw these maps for over 200 cities across America. And he says in his book that the pseudoscience of eugenics, the fake science of eugenics, which ranks racial groups by their supposed intelligence, that is what's used to create, is undergirds this map. So a lot of people look at this and they say, oh, this is the redlining map. But it's really 4 colors on this map: red, blue, yellow, and green. So green was the wealthiest. Anglo-Saxon white folks were the ones who lived in green communities. Now, there's a nuance to that, because you had Black people did live in Roland Park, but they were domestics. They were maids. They were lawnskeepers. They didn't own property in Roland Park. They lived there. They were live-in servants, live-in domestics. So they did live there, but they were not homeowners. They were not landowners. They were barred from the basis of the policies we saw earlier. So there is nuance there. So those are the people who lived in green, who owned property in green communities. There was also discrimination against Jewish people as well. So oftentimes they were the ones living in the blue communities, them and other white people as well. But a lot of times the Jewish folks could not live in the green communities based on some racism there against them as well. Then in the yellow communities, oftentimes newly arrived European immigrants, they were being stigmatized and demonized as well. Italians, Irish, Polish immigrants, Russian Jewish folks. Oftentimes, when they first arrive in America, they aren't speaking English, they're still speaking their mother tongue, and they're not fully accepted as Americans yet. And so they're often the ones living in the yellow communities. And then in the red communities, you had urban Native Americans and African Americans. And that's nationwide. But in Baltimore, we're talking about African Americans that are concentrated in these red communities. And this map is determining access to capital. It's determining which communities receive bank lending for small businesses and for home loans. Now, you all tell me, what happens to a community that is denied capital year after year, decade after decade, and it's based on the color of the skin of the people that live in that community? It becomes dilapidated, becomes blighted, if you want to use that term. And what do people do if their neighborhood doesn't have resources? If it's denied capital to build, to send children to college, what happens in those communities? Eventually, people fight for resources, or they fight each other over crumbs, whatever crumbs are in those communities, and that's where you end up with crime, violence, the drug activity. When you try to control that corner, you can't have 5 different people on the corner. There's going to be a fight over that turf. And that's what happens when you have redlining, subpriming, all of this negative economic, structural economic activity that's denying capital and extracting wealth in Black neighborhoods, and then people are left to fend for themselves and survive. So that map right there is just totally critical to understanding Baltimore apartheid and the damage that racial segregation does. And this is what I showed you in the legend. Homeowners Loan Corporation later becomes the Federal Housing Administration. But we look over here in the corner, wait a minute, what's this over here? Compiled with the assistance of data furnished by the Department of Public Works, Bureau of Plans and Services, City of Baltimore. The City of Baltimore helps the federal government. Red line, yellow line is on neighborhoods. So we see how the city, housing authority, public health, neighborhood associations, churches, all these entities, the real estate board, play a role in making Baltimore apartheid a reality. It didn't happen magically. It didn't happen randomly. It happened intentionally, and it leads us to this map that shows what we look like today. It's a racial dot map created by Dustin Cable based on 2010 census data. He was at the University of Virginia at the time. Green represents Black, blue represents somebody who's white, red represents someone who's of Asian descent, and orange represents somebody who's Latino, Latina, and brown represents somebody who's other race or Native American. And we do have a small Native American community in Upper Fells Point, the Lumbee tribe. Several thousand moved from North Carolina and made their way to Baltimore. So I looked at this map in 2015, and I said, wait a minute, this pattern of where green is distributed, or where green dots are located, that looks like a butterfly. So I called it the Black butterfly. And so you see this geography, the white L, the Black butterfly, the Asian archipelago, and the Latino lagoon is what I call it. This racial geography of Baltimore seen very clearly with this racial dot map created by Dustin Cable. And we see here with this data from this mapping by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition that redlining is still going on. This is lending between 2011 2013. The bigger the dot, the more the loans. And look at where the loans are. The more green, darker the green, the more African Americans. But the lending is there in that L for home purchases. Here we go for small businesses. Most of the bigger dots are in that L. There is this cluster over here in Southwest Baltimore, south of Pigtown, where there's some lending for commercial activity. But by and large, it's clustered, and especially in the harbor, along the waterfront, in that area, lots of lending taking place. So this isn't just a historical phenomenon. It is still going on. The access to capital based on race. And there's this analysis by Zillow showing that between 1997 and 2017, the homes that were located in those red colored communities, their home values are far below
Oh,
the home values of blue, green, and yellow color coded communities today. And we see that the gap isn't getting smaller, the gap is actually getting bigger because we have not paid attention. We have ignored, we have allowed, we have condoned, we have turned a blind eye to the ways in which racial segregation still operates and how it structures advantages for white L community while structuring disadvantages for Black butterfly neighborhoods. Things are different. Access to transit, banking access, the lending that I talked about, policing is different. Public housing sites, I showed you those, they're different. The way you can find people who have housing choice vouchers, formerly known as Section 8 vouchers, you can see a pattern differently by if I showed you that map. Schools, taxes, all these things, food access are different. And one thing that's not on there, and this revelation came to me when I was living in Madison last year, is green infrastructure, access to green space, parks and trees, the flowers and the bees. And it hit me that when you disconnect people from nature, you're disconnecting people from their creator, because now they can't see the beauty of God's creation. When they walk outside, they see asphalt, concrete, brick, metal, hard, permeable surfaces. You can't really appreciate the goodness of what God has done when you are living in a red line community under green apartheid, when you don't have good green. When I go to Roland Park, I see just trees, greenery just bubbling over. The leaves are hanging over the side of the street. I'm saying, Lord, this is just bucolic, lush green foliage. Oh my goodness, I feel like I'm in Harry Potter land. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful, beautiful. But when I go to Sandtown, I'm like, where are the trees? Where are the flowers? Where is the green space? There's a virtual forested areas in North Baltimore. You find scraggly trees over in Sandtown. And that, I'm telling you, that you're disconnecting people from their creator when that happens. And it just so happens that research shows there's a tremendous mental health impact as well. When people they're in green space, in beautiful gardens, that is very therapeutic. Blood pressure goes down, your heart rate slows down. I mean, it allows you to get back in tune with this environment, this planet, this ecosystem that the good Lord created for us, but we are depriving. That's what happens in red line communities. People are deprived of the very thing that connects us to our creator. And so these are the ways by which apartheid in Baltimore structures advantages for some, structures disadvantage for others, and it is intentional. So what do we do? In my book, I call for Baltimore neighborhood reparations to repair the damaged environment caused by intentional actions, intentional policies, practices, systems, and budgets. We have to make Black neighborhoods matter in development policies. We have to stop redlining because it's still going on. Stop redlining and subpriming. And we got to make sure the banks are treating Black communities equitably and equally. We have to institute community control of planning, of resources, so that people have a role to play in determining the future of their neighborhood. And then when we have development, we got to develop without displacing people. These are the types of things that I talk about in my book. These are the ways that we can actually repair, restore, rejuvenate, and make sure that the black butterfly is able to thrive and grow, and people are able to reach their full potential. Another idea I talk about in the book is the racial equity social impact bond. And virtually half of this is getting rid of toxic lead. Toxic lead exposure, people talk about the school to prison pipeline. Toxic lead is a heavy metal that does not belong in the human body. Children, babies, are poisoned by this lead exposure because lead tastes like candy. So when you have cracked paint peeling off the wall and children, what do? They put everything in their mouths. All you need is like 3 granules of sugar. That's the only amount that you need for lead poisoning ensues. Lead poison has a devastating impact on the human brain. Cognitively, it messes up people's ability to regulate their emotions. Somebody steps on my shoe, pop, hey, why you hit me? I couldn't regulate my emotions. The first thing that came to my mind, that's what I'm gonna do. Lack of ability to regulate your emotions is correlated with aggressivity, impulsivity. These are all the ingredients you need for elevated levels of crime and violence. And it also impacts the executive reason portion of the brain. So the brain, part of your brain that says, I'm going to make a good decision. I'm going to think rationally. I'm not going to hit him back. I know he really didn't mean it. That part of the brain is screwed up. And so now, pop, you're just reacting off of instinct. And so this heavy metal is devastating. And there's a preponderance of lead poison in red line communities because these communities did not have the money, they didn't have capital to fix up those homes, to make sure that you had that exposure neutralized and eliminated. It's still there. Lead is in the water. That's why in the school system, they can't drink from the fountain. They're given bottled water because there's lead in the pipes in the school. So you have lead in the water, lead in the air, especially down in Curtis Bay, South Baltimore, the industry down there. Got lead in the air, lead in the water, lead in the homes, and lead in the soil. So that's why half of this plan is just, let's get rid of all this toxic lead. And then the other half we can use for permanently housing people without homes, doing community redevelopment. We can boost the number of safe street sites so we can increase violence prevention, eliminate transit, biking, and food apartheid and the black butterfly. I have 100 million here for substance abuse treatment, social work, counseling to address mental health issues that people are dealing with and have been dealing with for quite some time. So in my book, I'm really dealing with concrete solutions, not just loosey-goosey, oh, I wonder what we can do. No. I worked assiduously to lay out a concrete plan because the Bible says, write the vision, put it on the walls, put it somewhere where people can see it and make it plain, because that's the way that we can move forward. And that's what I tried to do as a scholar, was do my duty to say that this is possible. We can make repair. We can look in the mirror and understand that it's not random. We can accept responsibility. And there's a biblical concept that aligns with all of this called Jubilee. That after all the usury, after all the exploitation, after all the demonization, after all of that, in that 50th year, that we set the captives free, that we heal the brokenhearted, that we restore people to a place of promise, hope, and possibility. And I believe that's what we can do with the Black Butterfly. And I'll end with this, that we cannot make Black lives matter if we don't make Black neighborhoods matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Brown,
Yes, sir.
on behalf of our parish family and the friends tonight who are here with our parish family, we really want to thank you with all of our heart for the wealth of information you shared with us, but beyond that, for the way you shared it with your own heart and your sincerity and your passion. Your book is a wealth of resources. And I want to tell you that your book, The Black Butterfly, will serve as a go-to resource for us as we plan our path forward to be a positive force in moving our city to embrace equity of opportunity and resources so that we can become a united people. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have a couple of minutes for people who might just want to ask?
Sure.
Great, thank you. So we're going to open up the checkerboard here, and is there anyone who wants to? Okay, Joe and Peggy. Joe.
Yeah, this is Joe. Dr. Brown, thank you for your talk. I'm interested. One of the things that's going on near our church is the redevelopment of Perkins Homes.
Ah, yes.
And it's a very big, very complicated operation. And I'm wondering if you've done any analysis of that and, you know, how you feel about the various pieces involved in that.
Yes, thank you. Like you said, it's big, it's complex, but the heart of the matter for me is that Perkins Homes is located in very near the Inner Harbor thriving area. So it's a great place for folks. A lot of transportation, bus routes, and development that's on the rise, and everything that's taking place down there. So making sure people have the ability to return to the newly redeveloped community. To me, that should have been a priority. Oftentimes, public housing results in the displacement and dispersal of people. Of course, my book, I talk about the issues with uprooting Black communities over and over and over again. And then you wonder why Black neighborhoods don't have stability. When people have been uprooted 8, 9 times in 4 or 5 generations, you're not going to have stability. So bringing that community back was, to me, the real issue. And I thought they planned for that early on, but it seems like the plan has changed. And I'm still trying to get some confirmation, but I thought the original plan was to sort of tear down one unit at a time, or enough units where you could build one of the new towers or buildings or whatever they were going to build, and sort of piece by piece or building by building, you could have folks that move into empty units, and then when the new building is put up, then you could have people fill in that building, and then you go to the next building, build that one up, and then you have people move into that second building, and so on and so forth. But it seems like to me they've just said, well, we're going to just tear down the whole thing,
right?
And then we're going to rebuild everything, and then you're going to bring people back. It's the bringing people back part that hasn't been shown in previous iterations of public housing demolition to be a reality. Now, Hope 6 policy under President Clinton, it did not have a 1-for-1 housing replacement, no obligation for public housing to bring people back. The Choice Neighborhoods grant, which the Baltimore Housing Authority received under President Obama, has a 1-for-1 housing replacement. So the question is, will that be honored? Will folks really have the opportunity to come back? And a lot of that, I think, is going to depend on the length of time, because if it takes 5 years, people are going to be settled into their new communities. wherever they end up, and it's going to be too long, I think, for a lot of people to feel like they're welcome back, that they want to return back. If you can even find people, people's phone numbers change, and people may move 2 or 3 times. So by that time, are people going to be able to come back to a thriving space in the city? It's in the White L, or very near to it. So I think that's the concern that I have with Perkins Homes is, the legacy of public housing demolition and whether or not people are able to return back to a thriving area in that location.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
You just, Dr. Brown, thank you very much for your presentation. Awesome
Thank you.
presentation. You just mentioned Obama's right, whatever,
Choice
Choice
name.
neighborhoods.
bringing back. Can that be enforced? That's or is it just words?
It depends on who is enforcing it. The last administration, I don't think they were keen on bringing people back, on enforcing it. Matter of fact, the opportunity zones the Trump administration passed, which really was, research was showing that a lot of the tax credits were going to areas that were already gentrifying. So I didn't see a lot of regard for actually alleviating poverty, for addressing this history that I've discussed in any serious way. Will the Biden administration be different? Will Biden be president when it's time for people to come back? I don't know. So I think, enforcement is only as good as the people doing the enforcement and the will they have to enforce it. Will the Housing Authority of Baltimore City say, you know what, we're bringing everybody back, come hell or high water, and follow through? I don't know. I think that hasn't been the history. It has not been the history of America to make sure that you don't uproot and displace vulnerable people. So, of course, advocates have a piece or part to play. Residents have a part to play, but if you don't have the willingness of the federal government and the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, it may not very well happen.
That's what I was, you hit upon the idea of, can we do something about it? But we can, but you suggest too that if we're not getting in the ears of the federal government, then it's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah, I mean, if the Trump administration, they would not care one iota if people come back. So I mean, it's just, maybe the Biden administration will. So it helps a lot to have, folks in the White House, folks in HUD, folks in the Housing Authority who are serious about bringing people back. And if you don't have that, how are you even going to reach people unless you already had like a list and you follow up with people and you keep up with people, like the logistics involved, and then you have privacy laws and things of that nature. They have the information, advocates may not. And so the advocates and residents might be at a tremendous disadvantage unless they, set up a listserv and somebody's monitoring, keeping, phone numbers and addresses up to date. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying logistically, the governmental agencies are in the best position to do it. So their willingness is very much key.
Peggy, I know you had your hand up, but I want to flip to page 2 and see. And I see Al has his hand up for a question. Al?
Just a quick question. Is anything happening on the I-170 corridor between Mulberry and Franklin? I thought I had seen that there was something going to go on there, but
They were going to take it down.
Yeah, I just saw in the Baltimore Business Journal that the Mayor Brandon Scott, our new mayor, and the new DOT director or secretary, Pete Buttigieg, for the Biden administration, that they've been talking about tearing down the highway to nowhere and filling in that cavern that split apart West Baltimore back in the 60s and 70s. So that sounds exciting, but again, if you're going to do that and then develop it, of course, can you develop without displacing people? And can it be done as a restoration project, as a repair project? Do you compensate people who are displaced finally, and their descendants? I don't know, but I think that's the type of thinking that has to be centered in such an effort. But the prospect does sound very intriguing. It would be amazing if that really happened. And so, yeah, I did see that, and it's on it's on the antenna. Apparently, it's on people's radar.
Becky?
Dr. Brown, thank you not only for the presentation, but for everything that's come before it. Your involvement and your passion is so appreciated in the Be More Lead Free. The question I have is there a conglomerate group here like the Black Space in Chicago that we could maybe get in touch with to help us with our whatever?
Is that I don't know, I'm not familiar with them. Is that like a planning group, architects,
Yeah,
or?
yes. Yeah, it was
Okay.
in, I think I learned about it in your book.
Oh, that was Black Space in New York. And
Oh, okay.
which is a sort of a Avengers Justice League type of conglomeration of people who teamed up and got together and created that beautiful, document that really sort of highlights planning principles. I don't know if there's such a group in Baltimore, to my knowledge, of that nature. Um, so at least not to my knowledge is my question, or is my response. Um, are there people? I did talk about like organic Black developers in my book. You had Sarsfield Williams with Aspire Homes, uh, Vanessa Owens, her company Grand Monarch or Monarch Butterfly Enterprises, Laquita Chansey, who does Baltimore Homes. She builds tiny homes, and Bree Jones, Parody Homes. So these smaller Black developers, and Sarsfield Williams is an architect. So I mean, I like the idea. I think something like that may be coming, but those principles that they developed up in New York, they apply across. So whoever you run across, whoever you partner with, the idea is that those principles are really, really solid, really, really beautiful, and I believe would help any project be very effective. So those principles, and then hopefully something like that emerges over time.
All right, thank you. And I think
You're welcome.
Sharon had a question.
Good evening, Dr. Brown. I have, are you aware of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund here in Baltimore?
Yes, ma'am. I spoke at one of their, I believe it was, I don't know if it was a hearing or something they had with the Department of Housing and Community Development, maybe back in 2019, when they were trying to make sure that it was implemented, because they passed it, but then they had to get it funded, and it's just they've been trying to wrestle back and forth with DC or DHCD to make sure that becomes a reality.
Well, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a reality and is funded. It's funded
Good.
on a portion of taxes that large developers have to pay in order to build here in Baltimore. The present challenge that they're having is to get them. It's being spearheaded under another organization called Share, which is which is a grouping of community land trusts. There are 3 or 4 community land trusts that are in Black and brown areas who are working with Share, with the Fair Housing Roundtable, to have the city actually release this money. The city put out a NOFA for land trust housing back in October, and was supposed to announce a answer December 11th, and has yet to do that as of today. So that's another area. I'm going I work with them, so I'm going to see what we can do to put us together. Since you did speak at one of the meetings, I thought I remembered that because I thought I was at the meeting.
Yeah, it was at Morgan State, if you recall.
But thank you for your presentation this evening.
Yes, ma'am. And I think what I'll say is I'm wondering who Mayor Brandon Scott has appointed to be the commissioner of the art, because I thought Braverman was fired by Mayor Young.
Braverman is gone.
Right.
He
So I don't
hasn't
know.
got a new commissioner. There's a question whether the deputy mayor or the city administrator is going to have final jurisdiction over the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Yep. So as Mayor Scott, comes in and gets his team in place, I think hopefully he brings somebody in who's going to be very much in harmony with the direction that FDR, Fair Development Roundtable, wants to move in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
I would just like to say, thank you very much for this presentation. And also I would like to invite you to come to St. Vincent de Paul Church and walk around our amazing old building and park and just sort of soak in the history. We would love to have you come and see it in person, because if walls could talk, there would be quite a story there. But we would love to have you come. And so you're welcome anytime.
Thank you. Where's your church located?
120 North Front Street, which is right by the Shot Tower and the post office, where 83 ends and President Street begins.
Okay, so near City Hall, is that right?
Yep.
Very close.
Yep.
Very close. Very close.
Yep.
Yeah. So please come, and you might enjoy to see the history of the beautiful architecture and the people that are in our neighborhood.
You're talking about my weak spot with history, so you may have to just expect a visit, especially when things open back up. Thank you.
Okay.
Father, yes.
Father,
You're muted.
Father, unmute.
Question. I just did. One of the deeper concerns I have in talking about the change that you envision as necessary, I realize that kind of change requires change in beliefs. And boy, beliefs are incredibly difficult to change, no matter where you are on the whole spectrum of things. So I was curious whether you've done some thinking about that deeper belief change and how that happens in order for all the other things that you've been talking about to then be taken hold of and be actualized.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is the great challenge. Is to sort of, shift people's belief or give them evidence to change their mind if they're more rational on the rational side of the spectrum. And I think, my whole ministry, if you will, the way that I present, the things that I write, the content, the primary source documents, I'm trying to appeal to different parts of like people's brains. I'm trying to engage emotionally. I'm trying to engage rationally. I'm giving you evidence, primary source documents. I want to tell stories for those folks who like hearing stories. So I do think that, a book for people who read, at least, I grew up in the church too. And one of the major maxims of the church that I grew up in, come as you are, and you want to reach people wherever they are. And so I think that's what I try. I think that's been, the black butterfly itself, as a metaphor, as a device to reach people, to help them understand something about racial segregation that, otherwise that dialogue remains a very, wonky, policy oriented. Scholars talk about segregation a great deal, but to get people on the street to realize that this is a thing and it's still happening, and these are the impacts of it, and it's ongoing and it was intentional. So by giving out that kind of information, hopefully it causes people to say, all right, I can understand now that if I was blaming the people before, now I understand the role that institutions and governments, policies and practices that they played. And it wasn't the people's fault, that there really was housing policies, newspapers playing a role, different institutions demonizing, marginalizing, stigmatizing people based on the color of their skin. And it has tremendous economic impacts even to this day. And therefore, we must effectuate a repair, restoration, reparation policy set of a suite of solutions that are needed. So I think, at some point, people have to actually make that shift, for themselves. But I think, like any preacher, you have to give the word. You have to let it be known. And I think that's what my job has been, is to go out and say, hey, you know, a little bit like John, I was in the wilderness for a while, Father. I was in the wilderness. But thankfully people started listening, and I feel like more and more people are believing, but believing not just with their heart, but with their intellect as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry Sokola? Unmute.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks so much. This was wonderful. And two questions.
Jerry froze
One,
up.
because you mentioned now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Two things. One is you mentioned the word now, reparations and restoration. And I am curious about that. I'm very much interested in favor of the possibility of HR 40 coming up for discussion, for example. But going to, for example, the Episcopal Church's efforts at this, of a conversation about, is there something similar that we could do? I wonder really what the ultimate impact of that, of those sorts of individual efforts are at a community level. There are so many nonprofits out there, many faith-based, who have been over the years making investments in community empowerment and community mobilization, economic development in poor, blighted neighborhoods, trying to uplift community-based organizations. In many cases, requiring that to receive funding, those organizations have their board makeup, including people living in those communities, people in poverty. They've done some amazing things, including some of the land trust work that Sharon has mentioned, but it's not really affecting structural change in the way you've described it. So would it not be better somehow for those of us who are inclined in that direction of reparations to figure out ways that we can move that conversation along in a much bigger way, rather than in this sort of, one-on-one effort? I don't know. I suppose it's all good, but it doesn't seem like it's made that much of a difference in the past. And the second thing is, quickly, I live in a neighborhood that I think is pretty diverse. It's original Northwood between Loch Raven and the Alameda, right near Morgan. And it's racially diverse, economically diverse, age-wise, you name it. I wonder if neighborhoods like this somehow can be lifted up as models, and how that can be done.
Yes. Well, to the first point, which is a great question, I really think the opposite is true, because I think when most people think of reparations, they think we need to go to the federal government. And I think that's a long-term project. What I think we could actually achieve is like what the Maryland Diocese of the Episcopal Church has done. Very local, an institution saying we're going to look at our history and we're going to make amends. I actually think by starting locally, that actually we can move from the bottom up and maybe create a culture of reparations, which is really what's needed, because it's not just paying money and being done. The idea is we actually want to repair. We actually want to heal the damage and stop the harm. And so reparations is as much about saying, let's stop the redlining, stop the subpriming, stop lead poisoning, like even just stopping the damage. Even that can foster a great amount of healing. Even if no, it's going to take money to do those things. But I'm saying, even if you stop the harm, like if police didn't kill unarmed Black people anymore, just stop that. Like maybe they're not paying money, but I appreciate myself and my cousin and my brothers and sisters, my mother. I appreciate them not being targeted. Like just stopping harm is tremendous. As Malcolm X said, if you had a knife in somebody's back and you pull it out 6 inches, that's not still in their back. just pull the knife out of the back fully, you know, and maybe I can go over somewhere and go to the hospital and heal. But we can't operate when the knife is still in our back. And so I think, creating that from the bottom up when neighborhood associates, because then it becomes the great thing about what the Episcopal Church has done is they've shown is possible. So imagine more and more smaller groups do this, neighborhood associations, other church denominations, nonprofits, philanthropy. When you start seeing 10 and 20, institutions do this, suddenly the city of Baltimore is going to go, well, wait a minute. They're building a culture of reparations. They're sending the signal to us that this is something we need to do. And then imagine 10 or 20 cities start to do that. And then the state governments get on board. So I just think maybe it's true that going from the bottom up is really the way to go. And because we got to build the political will for that to happen at the federal level. And so I think that's really the way to do it. I think your second point, Northwood, I think there's a difference between having diversity and having real integration. And I'm not saying that that's true for Northwood. But I mean, I know there are challenges there. I know there's great promise and possibility there. I just think that, is it really integrated or is it just diverse? And I think that's a question across the board. Integration for me goes beyond just having, Black and white people and Asian and Hispanic folk, sitting down together. Is there real equality? Do people from different backgrounds have an equal say? If you had an equal number, does everybody have an equal say in decision making? So not just that we're in the room together or in the neighborhood together, but are the power dynamics really such where everybody has an equal or equitable share of the pie? So I think, I just think thinking through diversity versus real integration is where I would go. And I don't know the answer to that in Northwood. I think the people I've met there before have told me there's still some, challenges and nuances there. But certainly I like what's happening and what I'm hearing in the work that I've heard is being done. So could it be a model? I think it definitely could be.
Thank you.
Great.
Mary, Jerry, no, okay. Peggy, did you want to
Marianne.
take over?
Marianne.
Oh, Marianne, I don't see her. Okay, I see her.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I keep hearing and trying to process the idea of food deserts. And my question, I don't know whether it's the chicken or the egg, which comes first. Is there any kind of effort, or is there any kind of effort we could begin to encourage Giant or Safeway or Weiss to risk going into communities that obviously they have thought would not be profitable? If those places would probably in their mind dare to settle into places that they have not thought profitable, would that be of help to the community, or does the community have to rejuvenate itself before the grocery store will come in? I don't know which comes first, but the whole idea of, you can't only survive on the chicken and trout little shops, especially if you're concerned about fruits and vegetables and so forth. So
The Salvation Army in our neighborhood, which is Able, Charles Village, Waverly, opened a small grocery store, and because they considered us a food desert, which actually we're not, because we are blessed with many groceries and a farmer's market. But the Salvation Army has taken this into consideration, and they use it as bringing a grocery store to communities that need full grocery stores, and a way to train people for careers in this kind of business. And so they've how to run a produce section and how to run a butcher section and that kind of thing. So the Salvation Army has this in their among their projects, which is, I think, I'm not affiliated with the Salvation Army, but I think it's uplifting to know that they are even aware of this.
Yeah, and these are both, I mean, critical, questions and concerns. I think that, uh, you know, grocery stores by and large have a market imperative. They want to make money, and they look at the demographics. And in this country, by and large, race and income are highly correlated. So, unless you're talking about like maybe PG County, there aren't a lot of affluent Black areas where grocery stores are just running to get to. So I think that we probably are going to have to think outside the box. Maybe the Salvation, Army concept. I'm more and more in tune with cooperatives, and what can we do to, could the city do, for instance? I think they have I don't know the exact name, sustainability, some sort of sustainability agency where they handle food policy and city government. Can we get banks, through community reinvestment lending or, some other, I actually would love to see banks have a line item for not just lending to individuals, but lending to cooperatives. So cooperative lending, so that they can fund communities starting their own grocery store. There are examples of this, I think, in North Carolina, where a red line Black community was able to set up their own, I believe it's maybe called a grocery co-op. I just thinking about alternative ways of cooperatively using capital so that communities can sort of figure out what's going to work for them. Because their Whole Foods could go to Sandtown, but what if the people there don't like the food at Whole Foods? So just because it's fancy and other people like it, don't mean that the people in that community is going to like it. They may want something that caters to them. And so, yeah, that's the thing I'm thinking about is what type of grocery store would they like that offers the fresh fruits and vegetables, that's well done, well laid out, all of those things, space, accessible, things that people are going to need in their community. And then, I would think about also integrating like the farmers market. Somebody said that earlier. A lot of folks in Baltimore are beginning to do urban farms, community gardens. What if we had, and then you had an economy where, those gardens and farms are now helping put the produce in the stores, and then they're getting compensated. So setting up that sort of solidarity economy locally, I think, that's how you build community wealth, and not just, focusing on jobs and, sort of like this one-off sort of situation, but actually building community wealth, because now people are co-owners of a co-op, of participating in that farmers market. People are getting jobs through that. They can work in the community garden, you get the youth and young people out there and older folks doing community gardening and paying them to do that so they have jobs. So I just think more and more about, it's not so much what they can do for themselves. That's part of it, but also the funding does need to come in. And we need banks, we need the city government to allocate resources so that people can then use those resources to create the type of grocery food access mechanisms that will work for them.
You all, Dr. Brown has been so gracious to stay on longer than planned, so we truly appreciate that, Dr. Brown. And I think a lot of the things that we were going to talk about after Dr. Brown left, we'll save to next month, and we'll continue the discussion. But Dr. Brown, you're welcome. We're just going to close with a prayer. I stole some phrases from Amanda Gorman because nobody can say it better. So we'll stay on afterwards, but let's close for a prayer for anybody who needs to leave, okay? Where can we find light? What just isn't always justice. We are striving to create a union with purpose for all cultures. We seek harm to none. We want to be tied together victorious, Victory lies in the bridges. It's the past we stepped into and how we repair it. History has its eyes on us. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. Our inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy. Let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. There is always light if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Amen.
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 So everybody's muted, but we want to thank you so much, Dr. Brown, and we may be in touch if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We could have kept you here for hours asking questions, believe me.
We're glad you're back home here in Baltimore.
It's absolutely. Thank you. It's good to be back, and I don't know. I could probably some days I can talk for a few hours. So
All right, too.
watch out, Pastor Father. I might come up in the pulpit one day.
Excellent.
Father might give you a run.
Terrific, actually.
We can do it. We'll co-preach.
I like it. I like it.
Perfect.
Bring lunches, everybody.
We have precedent.
Yeah, I have a
have
Baptist
precedent,
background, so that's a good
Dr.
idea.
Brown, you know this community doesn't like long homilies.
Well, you have my email, Dr. Brown. So if the mood hits you, give me a buzz.
All right, sounds good. Thank you all. I really appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Love, family.
Peggy, there are so many of us, and reparation is such a huge topic. Could there be a small committee working on it and bringing suggestions to the rest of us?
Well, what we were going to do, maybe some today, but definitely next month, we're going to talk. Well, Skip, why don't you tell them what we're doing next month?
Yeah, what we had thought of was certainly everything we've been doing up to now. And certainly this conversation that we've had tonight with Dr. Brown really, I think, has prepared us to have a very open-hearted discussion among ourselves as one of the principal foci of the next month. Actually, Jody has been working on something that we never talk about, and that is the hidden, the invisible bias in all of us. If anyone was lucky enough to see Bryant Marx's thing on WMAR, it's outstanding. We're not aware of what our biases are because no one points them out to us. So this, I think, would be a very, very helpful thing. And we'll do that with Jody. But then right after that, I think we're at the prime point where we all just need to talk, first of all, as many people as can, just say, this is what I've learned, this is what I think about reparations or anything, and just listen to all of that. And then Mary, I think you give a very excellent suggestion. Once we've had that big round robin, then I think we could very well decide to break into sub-teams or groups to carry the conversation forward, because I think some major themes, major questions, major doubts, maybe some major possibilities will arise out of that very wide open discussion, and then breaking it down, and then maybe deciding there how we go forward. My mind was changed a little tonight because one of my questions was asked right there, and Jerry sort of raised it in a way when she talked about what I call incremental change. Does incremental change ever amount to being systemic? And he kind of blew my mind in a way when he said he thinks it can. So I want to think about that. Maybe next meeting I can talk about it. I think Father hit the other key thing, which is we're talking about 400 years of prejudice in this country, folks, which was preceded by how many hundreds of years in Europe as Europeans took over Africa, their attitudes. I mean, ignoring the civilizations that were there, which had often given them what they learned. We're talking about millennia, and yet we're not going to, that's not going to be an easy attitude to change. The other thing I had down here when he talked was part of white supremacy is the assumption that subjugated people can't think best for themselves. And it's part of that old plantation paternalism kind of thing. So how do you really get people to realize you've got to have the people who are most affected by this be part of the decision making for the
Oh,